Bernie Sanders tonight won the great state of Oregon. It's been called by everybody. As we're doing this live, it looks like he's up 6 points right now with 60% reporting, but it has been called by everyone, including TYT. Now, in terms of Kentucky, the Cenk Uygur rule is if it's within 0.5, if your person wins or loses, that is in reality a tie. I've been saying that from day one, literally from Iowa on. And I said during that coverage, if Bernie wins by 0.5, it's a tie. And he wound up losing by 0.2 in Iowa, I believe. That's a statistical tie. In the case of Kentucky, it looked like at 99% reporting, Hillary Clinton was going to win by 1 point. And I said live as we were doing the show, that is a win, okay? So you can't call that a tie. That's not within 0.5. 1 point is 1 point. It's a win. Now, as it turned out afterwards, they took some counties off. They put them back on. And at the end of the day, she won by 0.5. Sorry, Cenk rule. That's a tie. Okay? And so I'm not making it up afterwards. If you watch the live coverage, I know that the whole coverage this time was just for members, but the members saw it. And you could become a member too, tytnetwork.com/join. If you're watching this in some other place, although that would be a little ironic, but I think we might put 1 or 2 clips up on YouTube. Anyways, okay, but get the whole thing when you can. And we put up our coverage afterwards as well, so you can watch it on demand. Anyways, so we got a tie in Kentucky, and we've got a win in Oregon for Bernie Sanders. But if you want to call Kentucky a small win for Hillary, I got you. I'm not sweating that detail, right? So realistically, this is not nearly enough delegates for Bernie Sanders. You got to keep it real on that. He needed to win 66% of the delegates going forward. He didn't win 66% in Oregon, the state that he won. He only won by 6 points, let alone in Kentucky, where I just told you what happened, right? On the other hand, it would have been nice if Bernie Sanders had won by around 1 point in Kentucky, because then he could make the argument, I won in Indiana, I won in West Virginia, I won in Kentucky, I won in Oregon. My gosh, he's got no momentum whatsoever. Here, at least Hillary Clinton gets to say, well, I won, that state. And by the way, as we've been saying throughout, she's won many states before that, right? So I think in terms of optics, she at least got, she could breathe a sigh of relief on being able to say she won Kentucky tonight. In terms of delegate count, every race that Bernie Sanders doesn't win in a crushing style is a sigh of relief for Hillary Clinton, because he's running out of time and he's running out of space. Okay, so those are real. But I also want to talk about how he gave a great, energetic speech tonight, and man, that guy does not give up. Yeah. And I know that some people in the media are annoyed by that. Some people certainly in the Clinton camp are annoyed by that. A lot of people in the Democratic Party establishment are annoyed by that. But as I look at it, and he looks just as fired up as he did on day one, and he's talking about all the economic injustices that we're going to correct. He gets specific details of how we're going to do criminal justice reform, and we're going to liberate people in every way imaginable. And here on the show, we were talking about how, my God, imagine if he stopped imprisoning hundreds of thousands of people who were just in there on marijuana charges. Well, forget the guys who are already in prison. If he just stopped arresting people for marijuana possession and all the economic good that could do, let alone the freedom that it brings. And that's one of dozens of issues he talked about tonight. And the crowd was roaring as always.
Okay, so let me jump in, because I love that you pivoted to his speech, because I think that's important. So you mentioned the reality of the numbers, and, look, there's still a small possibility that he can win the nomination, but we got to keep it real, right? It's becoming increasingly difficult for him to do so, especially since he needed to win at least 65% of the vote moving forward, and unfortunately that didn't happen in Kentucky tonight. But I will say this, it's important for him to stay in the race, regardless of what the establishment says, regardless of the fear-mongering you hear from the Hillary campaign, indicating that if he doesn't drop off or drop out, Trump's going to win, he's helping Trump, whatever. All that stuff should be brushed to the side, because right now what Bernie Sanders is providing is a voice for the disenfranchised and for the poor. You don't hear lengthy speeches where politicians are specifically mentioning these individuals and how they want to help them, specifically raising awareness about issues like income inequality, political corruption, climate change, prescription drug manufacturers taking advantage of us. These are issues that we should be educated about through our media, but we don't even get that for the most part, right? Of course, with independent media, you get that. But I love that, he has a voice. He's getting through to people, and what he's providing for those who have been disenfranchised is so much more valuable than anything else that could come out of this election.
He even talks about Native Americans when there's almost no votes to get there, right? But he doesn't talk about it because he cares about the votes. He talks about it because he cares about the justice of being able to serve that community. That's why you never hear any other politician talking about it. They're like, what's in it for me? Native Americans don't vote enough for me, right? Well, but it's not about him. His slogan isn't, I'm with him.
Yeah. The only other politician who brings up Native Americans is Donald Trump, and only to attack Elizabeth Warren's ancestry.
That's right.
So look, the numbers don't look good. Obviously, like somebody tweeted me earlier today, like, "Oh, it makes me sad that they seem to be losing hope." And I get what you're saying. I personally believe, and this is just me because I strive to be a robot. Hope is like an emotional state that I have in the absence of information, and gradually, as I gather information, I replace the emotion with facts. But that doesn't change that, obviously, still support him, loved his speech, and there is still a path. It's not necessarily a delegate path, although that's not impossible. It's just extremely unlikely. We're going to talk about the numbers soon, even in California. It's not looking great, and he has to destroy in California. But it's still not impossible. And in 2 months, when they're at that convention, look, Trump is not going to become drastically more popular because as he talks more, people hate him. He's a crazy person. But neither is Hillary. I don't see her drastically raising her favorables with the population, especially with the way that we know she's going to campaign. It's 100% anti-populist, especially in comparison to Donald Trump. And so that combined with the way Bernie is already polling, and I saw on CNN, they're messing with the map and they're trying to figure out how to get to 270 for everybody. Like, forget all of those manipulations. Bernie Sanders, we saw today, is beating Trump in Georgia. You could blow that entire map away with Bernie Sanders. And the lie that he hasn't been attacked, he's already been criticized in the most disingenuous and ridiculous ways on a daily basis for months now. He's the guy. He's the guy that can beat Trump. He's the guy that can easily win the presidency.
So Johnny Pie has a lot of nicknames, but we might have to add Spock to them, Spock Iadarola. For this sentence alone, I wrote it down. Hope is an emotional state in the absence of information.
Wow, that was very eloquent.
Yes, but it's also kind of creepy in how robotic it is.
Yeah, and totally. And most people would be like, you should have both, and that's why my therapist criticized me for, like, express your emotions, man. I get that. But
see, he is Spock.
You have a therapist?
This is back in the day.
Okay, all right. Well, it largely worked.
It didn't stick.
Hold on, but let me respond a little bit to that because, like, we do get it from, avid Bernie supporters. And here's the thing. We're not here to lie to you guys to make you feel better. We're here to tell you the truth, okay? And honestly, some of the truth sucks, and it sucks for us. And a lot of times I've left the show feeling very deflated and terrible that, the primaries didn't work out as well as they should have for Bernie Sanders. At the same time, I'm not going to feed you guys misinformation to make you feel better. And if that offends you, well, you're going to be offended a lot because it's just the way it goes.
The mainstream media lies to you.
Yeah.
Like, everybody says that they like us because we're real.
Yeah. Right.
That's what real is. It doesn't just mean real when it's cool or real when it's fun. It's real when it kind of sucks. But the suck isn't the end. There's stuff after the suck.
Yeah.
Yes, and so you don't just get to keep it real when it's convenient, right? That's not what it means. But I'm a half full guy, right? So hope for me is an emotional state in the abundance of information. So let me give you a little bit of that hope. Now, it might not be in the electoral sense that you're looking for, but number one, Bernie Sanders has won on the issue of the minimum wage. Before, we were having a conversation of whether it should go from $7.25 to like, oh my God, $9 people were flirting with. Somebody said 10. It was like, wow. That was just like 2 years ago, right? Now, he moved the goalpost all the way to 15. Then Hillary Clinton had to try to catch up and she got to 12. And then just about a month ago, she's bragging in New York when they passed it at 15, as if she had the idea for $15 minimum wage. No. Bernie Sanders had that idea, and even if he loses electorally, He won on that policy. And remember with Bernie Sanders, when I interviewed him here on the Young Turks, and I asked him, hey, in the situation where you don't win, what is it that you want? And he immediately gave a list of policies that he wanted. There was no talk of like, hey, maybe I could be VP, there's a cabinet. I know that he wouldn't, like any reasonable politician wouldn't say, all right, I'll take Secretary of, Treasury and we'll call it a day. Of course not. But they would have intimated it, and their answer would have been around that rather than around, here are the policies I want for the American people, right? Which is what he listed. And he already got one of them in terms of the minimum wage in all those different cities that he listed in his speech today, right? In Seattle, LA, New York, and all these different places, it is already $15. Yeah. He's already won, right? And that's just getting warmed up. In my lifetime, I was telling these guys as we're doing the show live, I never saw a politician say that the business model of Wall Street is fraud.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't negotiate with the banks. We shouldn't regulate the big banks as they are today. We should break up the big banks. That is amazing. And now you've got Hillary Clinton taking $15 million just in the last quarter from the big banks, as again, Senator Sanders pointed out tonight in his speech, at least pretending that, oh, I'd break up the big banks too. I mean, if the situation was right, I'd break them up.
Even though money doesn't affect politics and it's totally fine and they're cool.
Of course. He moved the conversation. And by the way, right now, all that talk of like, he's got to get out, he's hurting Hillary. No, you don't get it, you schmucks. CNN just ran, even CNN, now that Donald Trump doesn't have his empty podium anymore since he's already won, they ran about half an hour at least of Bernie Sanders' speech. That's free media for the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And in most of that speech, he attacked Donald Trump. You've got a situation here where it's 2 against 1 in attacking Donald Trump. That's not a bad thing. That's a great thing, right? And then finally, you want to talk about winning. He's won the future. He wins in every demographic under the age of 45. I know what the mainstream media say. They say, oh, those young kids, they'll get jaded just like we did. And then they'll give up all these dreams and hopes of revolution and making things better. Things don't get better, okay? They'll learn how to swallow that bitter pill like we did, right? I don't think so.
Yeah, and it's not just the bitter pill, Cenk. What they fail to understand, 2 things that are different about our generation compared to older generations. Number one, the country has moved so extremely to the right that to expect liberals today to become even more conservative in the future, I think is ridiculous. Like, I have actually gotten more liberal as I've grown older. The paradigm has shifted politically in the country, right? We've become very right-wing. But also at the same time, the reason why people become more conservative as they age is because they attain more wealth, right? Older generations were able to do that. And right now, the millennial generation is having a very difficult time getting on its feet because of the terrible economy we've inherited, right? And we have the issue of student loan debt, which is huge, okay? At this point, it's surpassed credit card debt. It's past $1 trillion. That's how much students owe in student loan debt in the country right now. And so, yeah, the system is rigged against us. And to think that we're just going to not only accept that system, but fight for it is ridiculous. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, so I think they have a fundamental miscalculation. So when Anna says the country has moved right, what we mean is that the political establishment has moved right. So a lot of Barack Obama's positions today are actually way to the right of Ronald Reagan's positions. You know, Republicans are always crying about amnesty. You know who did the original amnesty? Ronald Reagan. And by the way, that was not like something they called amnesty. It was amnesty. He said, everybody that's here illegally, okay, you now have amnesty and you all get to stay here. And back then, they were like, wow, what a right-winger Ronald Reagan is. Now that's a left-wing position.
Yes.
Right? So politically, the country's moved right. But in terms of the actual people, the polling indicates the country is significantly center-left and moving further left because the younger generation is more progressive than any generation we've ever had since we've been doing polling.
Yeah. And
And not by a little, but by a lot. And so the miscalculation that the establishment press has, because they are the establishment, is they think, no, we're always going to win. It's always going to be the status quo. No, look at what happened on the right-wing side with Trump. Look at what's happening on the left-wing side with Bernie Sanders. The jig is up. They're on to you. Politicians are not serving them. They're serving their donors. Everybody's sick of the establishment. There's a revolution afoot, and that tsunami is definitely coming. And so Bernie Sanders is the best representation of that. So even if he loses electorally, and that's not over yet, and there's California is the biggest state, and we're going to do our part, and we're going to vote, and we don't get swayed by who's winning and who we think is going to be on the winning team. We vote based on policies, right? But even if he loses electorally, his idea and his message is almost bound for victory. That victory is almost inevitable. I believe electorally it will almost certainly happen in the next election. But what's much more important to me, and I think to the country, is actually fixing the system. And one of the ways that you do that is you get an amendment to get money out of politics. Bernie Sanders is constantly talking about public financing of elections so that the private financiers of those elections don't get everything from the politicians. That makes sense. We got to make sure that we win on that goal because that's the thing that fixes everything else.